here's our bottle of albumin that we just mixed up, and I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the tray that we're going to be using, and it works best when it's at room temperature, between 75 and 80 degrees. And so since it's coming out of the refrigerator, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the tray first so that there's more surface area that can start to warm up as I'm preparing the paper. So we'll go ahead and pour that in, and as we do that, we want to try to avoid getting bubbles. We want as few bubbles as possible. So I'll just gently kind of pour it from one side. You can see it's nice and clean. What we want is a hot press paper so that we have a really smooth surface, so that the detail will be as sharp as possible, and so that we'll have as glossy of a surface as possible as well. So just take a normal thumbtack and moving in about 1/4 of an inch or so and down about 1/4 of an inch is put just a small pinhole through there. We're going to be hanging it lengthwise, so on the back side, what I like to do is just put a little mark here that tells me which side's going to be the top. Because we're going to be double coating it, we'll have one of the sides that's going to hang at the top for the first drying, and then when we coat it the second time, we'll reverse it and have this hanging at the bottom. So I'll just run some water, and I like to just kind of drip it along here and then use my hand. I don't want it to be oversaturated, so I'll just kind of use my hand to smooth out the water, and that way it gets kind of an even coat. This is really curly right now because we just cut it from a rolled piece of paper. We'll just gently kind of lay this along the back, and then what I do is try to smooth it down so we get as much of the paper towel in contact with the actual paper. And we now have a wet piece of paper. So what we want to do is, in order to lay it into the albumin easily, is we need to kind of curl the front edge just a little bit up and away from the albumin. If we allow it to just lay or have kind of bubbles or ripples in it, what will end up happening is parts of the albumin will come up and over the edge. And then we're going to be kind of curling it a little bit so we can lay the center part down first into the albumin, and then as soon as it touches the surface, I'm going to quickly release both sides so that it can drop down into the albumin. Okay. Then once it lays down in there, gently with your finger, press it down so that it touches the surface. Again, do this gently as to not submerge it. So I'll just gently grab it by one corner and then ease it out of the albumin. And there's our piece of paper. Look at the back of our piece of paper, find the T. That's going to be the top side for the first coating. And then what we need to do is just take one of our push pins, place that through one of the holes that we've already punched. So you can see, let's get that through that hole that we've already punched. And then hang it up onto our drying rack. And so usually what I do is just kind of hold on to the back with my fingers and push the pin through. We're going to use just a plain piece of paper towel, and we're going to just run it along this bottom edge, and that'll help soak up some of the extra albumin that's collecting at the bottom. With a lot of the other alternative processes, sometimes using a hairdryer maybe isn't the best idea. But with albumins, the hotter it is, the actual glossier it turns out. So if you want to use a hairdryer for part of the drying time, it could actually help. So just to help expedite things, I usually use it a little bit. It also kind of can help equalize the drying of the surface by putting the hairdryer both on the front and on the back. Take it along the edges, especially along the bottom edge, because that's where it's going to be kind of collected. where we're going to be pressing them with a hot mounting press. If you don't have access to a hot mounting press, the best other option, instead of just waiting for 2 weeks for the albumen to cure, would be to use an alcohol solution. When you use the alcohol solution, you need to mix it with a 15% salt solution, so that as it gets soaked, some of the salt's going to leach out of the albumen, so we want to make sure that it's replaced back in an equal capacity into the paper. Once it's been soaked for 15 seconds in the alcohol solution, rehang it, allow it to dry again, and then do the second coat. So we're going to lay it face down and then take our paper towels and go ahead and lay that along the back surface. And so I'm just gently scooping and moving that off to the side. Any of those air bubbles, if they stay on the surface when we go to coat our paper, they're going to get trapped underneath the paper and just prevent the albumen from getting in contact with the paper. So here's our first sheet of paper. Again, we're going to try to just as gently as we can lay it on top of the surface and release it and press down just ever so gently so that it comes in contact with the albumen, but not hard enough to allow it to kind of creep over the edge. And as we do that, we just want to gently lift one edge and smoothly lift it out so as to not get any of the albumen onto the back side of the paper. And because this is our second coat, we just want to ensure that we take a look at the back and make sure that we have the T facing at the bottom. So we're just going to rotate this around so that the T is going to be at the bottom, not at the top. And then when we hang it up in our drying rack, it'll be facing the right direction so that we get a nice smooth surface. So at this point, my last sheet is in the albumen getting its second coat. And once it gets hung up, I'm just going to let those dry overnight. And the coated pieces of paper can last for months and months. So I'm just going to hold on to those until it's time to actually expose them. And at that point, sensitize them right before use. It's always kind of best to use the silver as fresh as possible. It is possible to use it days later, but I've noticed that I have a tendency to get a little bit more both value and color in the highlights if it's been days since I've sensitized the paper.